You know, mental health issues they're just hard. They're hard to talk about. I mean, for all the progress we've made over the past years to bring mental health out of the shadows, it still remains a topic that we don't know how to address very often. How do we talk to each other about feelings of isolation or anxiety or depression or despair? And moreover, how do we talk to our students when they need to talk to us about their emotional concerns? As faculty, we're an important part of the early detection system for mental health issues. And as faculty, we want to provide support to our students. But how can we be confident that we're providing the support and direction that aligns with our good intentions? How can we be certain that we know all the resources available on campus to deal with acute emergencies or ongoing mental health issues, or which resources are the most appropriate for a particular situation? Is our desire to offer emotional support and direction to our students in tension with the academic demands we make of them? And if so, how do we balance the two? And how do we do any of this when we're not trained as mental health professionals? And we're talking about mental health even under the best circumstances is so difficult. So we're going to talk about some of those issues today. I would like to reference a recent article in the Villanova that talked about how challenging it can be for students when their inner lives conflict with the campus culture that values being outwardly polite and friendly, and when the unspoken message is everything is fine, or even more than that, that everything has to be fine, as it often is here. And challenges arise from the highly competitive nature of the university and what the Villanova article describes as a culture of perfectionism at Villanova. Now, these issues are hardly exclusive to us. A national college health assessment of 88,000 undergraduates nationwide revealed that in the previous 12 months, 22% reported experiencing anxiety, 11% had panic attacks, 18% experienced depression, fully 39% could identify at least 3 instances in the previous year when they felt hopeless. So today's panel is going to shed light on these issues and address doubts and questions raised by faculty about how to approach mental health issues and how to treat our students with empathy and compassion. Feedback solicited from faculty has been incorporated into the presentations, and there will be time for questions at the end of the session. We have 3 speakers today, and I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're going to present. Dr. Joan Whitney is Associate Vice President and Executive Director of the University Counseling Center, a position she's held for many years. A licensed psychologist, she earned her PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and she specializes in the mental health of university students with expertise in anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, as well as the emotional difficulties experienced by college student athletes. She's going to discuss when, how, and why to make use of the Counseling Center. We have Dr. Nancy Mott, who initiated the Office of Learning Support Services in 1999 and has been for over 25 years a teacher and instructional designer. The original mandate for LSS was to set up a support system for students with learning disabilities. 10 years later, that mission was expanded to provide support services to all students with or without documentation. Nancy will discuss where to refer students of concern, whom to contact, and the challenges faculty face with disability accommodations. And we also have Dr. Pat Bradley on our panel. Pat is an associate professor in the Fitzpatrick College of Nursing. She earned her MSN and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and her BSN from Temple. She's a leading expert in psychiatric mental health nursing, and as a course leader for the undergraduate psychiatric mental health nursing courses, she manages mental health clinical and theory course content and assists faculty and students within the course. She's going to offer a faculty perspective on supporting students facing mental health challenges. So I'm going to hand the discussion over to Joan Whitney. Joan?
Hi, and welcome. As Matt said, you are the early detection system. You see the same students over and over again. You see so many students that you know what's within the normal range and what isn't. So the counseling center can't possibly be the detectors except of students who come in to seek our services. You are the detectors. So I'm going to first review the counseling center. Are you hearing me okay? Besides my tongue clicking? I'll give you an overview of our services and then talk about a conversation you might have with a student and how to effectively refer them to the counseling center. So the counseling center offers three kinds of services. The vast majority of our time is spent doing individual therapy with students who come in. Now, when I say therapy, it's in quotations because many of those visits are single visits. And it's the nature of the beast at this life stage. They want what they want when they want it, as you may have noticed. And many of them are not interested in deep insight or just had a broken heart because of a breakup, and then they get unbroken up with the same person, and they're just fine the next week. But we do therapeutic things with anyone who walks through the door. We see about 1,400 students a year, for about 4,000 to 6,000 sessions. We see 16% of Villanova's undergrads every year, which is about twice the national average. 8% is the sort of going number. So we're very pleased about that. And we see 12% of all students, including those undergrads and graduate students, law students. I'm often asked whether multicultural students make use of the counseling center, and those are data that we do have. And basically, we see a percentage of multicultural students consistent with their percentage in the population, the overall population, with a very slight, like 1 point, overrepresentation of Asian students and a very slight underrepresentation of Hispanic students. And Caucasian students and Black students are consistent with their percentage in the population. So the vast majority of our time is spent in individual counseling. The second thing we do is educational programs, and I'm delighted to have you as an audience because most of those educational programs are done when faculty invite us into their classroom. We love it because you have a captive audience, and so they have to listen to us. And whether your subject matter is relevant to mental health or not, you can still invite us in. And we're often invited in when you have to go to a conference or can't be in the classroom for one reason or another. We do about 55 educational programs on a variety of topics each year. We also mentor the student club, the mental health advocacy and something, and awareness student club, which formed just last year. And the third service we provide, very relevant to you all, is consultation. That's with parents, with faculty, with deans, and with staff. And so we do around 1,300 to 1,500 consultations every year, which, given that the vast majority of our law classes are in session, adds up to about 40 per week. So it's a very major service that we provide, but it's not scheduled. You call and we call you back, and you're usually calling about a specific student whose behavior was worrisome to you or a conversation that you've had. Please make use of that service. We enjoy talking with you, and I think we can be really helpful. There are two pieces of news from the Counseling Center. One is that our attempts to diversify our staff, which we've been successful and unsuccessful with over the years in a rolling kind of way, but we have recently been very successful, and so we've been able to hire 2 new psychologists who arrived in late August from underrepresented groups. The second thing for you to know about, because it's a new initiative on campus and we're just starting it, is that we're initiating a suicide prevention program campus-wide. That will involve an intensive training session for 30 to 35 faculty and staff, not students. And that happens in early September. And then each of those people who has that whole 8-hour of training will be able to become an instructor on mental health kinds of issues. It's not just about suicide. And they're each asked to do 3 a year. So we're talking 90 programs a year or more. The essential facts that you should know about the Counseling Center. It's over in that building behind you, the Health Services building. Many of you have had your flu shots there, so you know the building well. We don't give flu shots. We're in the same building as Student Health and Health Promotion, and that's relevant to the question of, will I feel exposed, will I be noticed going into the Counseling Center? And two things you can tell students. One is you could be going to any of those three services, as well as room 200, which is a seminar room. But also, if you don't want to enter from this side, you can enter from the lower level of the parking lot, and nobody ever witnesses you're going in because it's dark and dreary down there. It's free. It's completely free. We charge for nothing, not even coffee, because I don't want to see dollars exchanged. It's confidential, and that's dictated by state law. All of our counselors are licensed psychologists. We have no choice. We must keep things confidential, except if there's imminent harm or danger to self or others, in which case we have an obligation for protective action. And the other exception is if a student makes us aware of child abuse that is happening to a child who's under age 18, and you have that obligation as well. Appointments are scheduled during the day, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Except if it's urgent, we save 6 slots a day. For urgent, can't wait until they're scheduled in 2 or 3 or 4 days. We actually, unfortunately, with a parental leave and 1 fewer staff member this year, got up to a 2-week wait. That's never happened before. But we do not use a wait list, unlike other colleges. We just keep absorbing. It's the absorption model. People come in, we figure out how to fit them into the schedule. But you can request a student be seen the same day because you're very anxious about it. That's legit. Just call us and tell us when so-and-so comes in, please fit them in the same day. After hours, one of your blue handouts gives you all of those numbers. So basically, you can send students, or you can call student health, public safety, or the student can reach out to the RA. We are on call 24/7. We're not doing counseling 24/7. That should be done during daytime hours, as is true in the real world. But if somebody's in crisis, then they need to be attended to. And so we can be reached typically by student health, and we'll have a conversation with the student. Doing okay. During hours, even if we're open, if you're faced with a student who seems incapable of talking in a coherent way, or walking to the counseling center, or anything else that's worrisome, you have a student who looks very regressed and curls up in a ball. These things all happen, not frequently, but they do happen. Call public safety, because they are very well trained to know how to interact with that student, and they will get them to us or to the emergency room, depending on what the situation is. And they've got a hotline to us. So never hesitate to do that. These are kindly public safety officers who are well trained and are very, very kind of parental or avuncular or something with the students. They have a very warm way about them. How and when to refer? Well, when a student seems to be having emotional, I'm not going to call it even mental health, emotional difficulties, how do you open that conversation? I'd start by saying I'm concerned and let them know what it is behaviorally that has gotten you concerned. So you might say, because otherwise they wonder why you're concerned and they get a little paranoid about it. So talk about, I'm concerned because you've been missing class or you've been sleeping visibly through class. And I'm not saying that to embarrass you, but rather to tell you it concerns me. You've been missing exams, your papers have been late. Tell them what the behavioral sign is, because there is one that got you concerned. Or they're laughing inappropriately in class, very inappropriately, which is a real danger sign. So tell them the behavior. Say, I care about your overall well-being, not just your academic performance. And how are you doing in general? These are just wide open questions. I know the students wish to do well academically, but there's something often that's in the way of that happening. And that seems to be the case with you. Are you aware of what that issue is? Don't push it. This is round one. If they open up or they don't, no reason to push it. You can always have a round two. If a student expresses feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or depressed, then what do? Number one is normalize or destigmatize it. You can really be helpful by doing that. You can say, you know, you're not alone. Other people may not look whatever they've described, but it doesn't mean they're not feeling that way. We can all put on a happy face. And they'll tell you that all other students all look fine, and they know it because they see them on Facebook. And I always ask, well, do you put pictures of yourself weeping on your Facebook page? There's often a difference between the private and the public self. I would also say the college years are a time of major adjustments and of growing pains. And I say that in part, particularly with our first generation students, but also with our memory impaired, college educated parents, have a way of saying these are the best years of your life. They weren't when they were students, but now they are. So it's useful for you to say to them, these are challenging times, and validate their feelings without minimizing them. It's not helpful to say, don't be silly, I know you'll do great, you're really smart, you'll do fine. Now those are the things we all say to our own children all the time, right? I'm certainly guilty of that as well. You're trying to fix them up. But it isn't useful because then it shuts them down and they don't have a conversation. So I'd suggest instead saying things validating like, I understand that you're feeling whatever they just said that they're feeling, discouraged, depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, or whatever. And I'm hopeful for you. And I think with the appropriate supports, you can feel better. If it seems warranted, refer them to the counseling center. Tell them that 55% of undergrads come to the counseling center at some point during their 4 undergraduate years. That's very normalizing for them, 55%. That it's not just for students with serious problems, it's for all students. Students have reported to me that it's really been helpful to them. So when they tell you, oh, I saw a psychologist, they're crazier than the people who see them. That's the favorite. You can say, well, I've had very good feedback about the people at the counseling center. Don't tell them that we're not crazy, because I can't prove that to them. Counseling helps you be more effective. With the business students, it really helps when you say, you know, you're thinking of being a consultant, you're helping people be more productive. That's what counseling does for people. I care, but I'm not a professional counselor. So I'm really glad you opened up to me, but I want you to have the advantage of a professional counselor. And finally, let me know how it goes, and I may check back with you. So what I'm telling you is you can't check with us unless they sign a release to allow us, in which case we send you a brief email saying thank you for referring so-and-so. I often ask the student, if they say who referred them, I'll say, may I get back to them? Students often wonder the step-by-step, especially if they've never been to a counseling center before. So tell them concrete nitty-gritty details. That you'll walk in or you'll call and you'll make an appointment and you'll be seen within a few days. It won't conflict with your class schedule. The counselor will help you, they'll talk with you. Their offices look like living rooms, basically. They're not wearing white coats. They're normal, ordinary people, much like our faculty. We don't like to think we're ordinary, but you know, it's reassuring. They'll help you think about what's troubling you. They'll provide you with privacy. Nobody will know what you share. That's a big concern that students have. It's left over from high school guidance counselors who would pick up the phone and call parents very casually. And it gives it a bad reputation. But assure them that's not the case. It will not appear on your record anywhere. You'll think through strategies of handling your emotions and the situation you're in right now. They'll provide insights about ways to handle your emotions. They'll help you get perspective. They won't be biased in the way that a close friend may be, because people will say, well, I share it with my close friend, but that isn't the same. and they have lots of experience helping college students just like you. It's up to you whether you go more than once. You're going to the counseling center doesn't mean you're committing yourself to a series of sessions. Many students go once and yet get something out of it, by some miracle, but you don't have to have that problem. So some final thoughts. If students cannot do the work in your class, you're not doing them a favor by saying, you can do it, I know you can do it. I mean, if it's the first week of class, that's fine. But if they're not functioning and they've already been late on papers and missed exams, etc., helping them hang on is really not a favor to them because they're going to experience a failure. So you don't need to bring up the idea of them taking a leave of absence, but you can. But they'll also often bring it up on their own. And sometimes what they report is, my faculty told me that there's no reason for me to take time off. And I think faculty mean well when they say that to the student. They're trying to be their cheerleader in a way. But many students need to take a medical leave of absence and will be way more prepared to be successful when they return. Parents get worried that they'll never come back to college. The very vast majority of them do. Set clear expectations. If they're behind in the work, let them know deadlines so that they know if they're meeting them or not, and you know if they're meeting them or not, so that you don't end up at the end of the semester with someone who's not going to pass your course. And when actual specific situations come up, and you can't remember what we talked about today, call us. When I learn new technology stuff, I only learn it if I go use it a minute later. And even then, I may not remember it a week from now. Call us. It's a conversation with us. Tell us the situation, and we're more than happy to consult with you. So thank you, and I turn it over to my colleagues.
Well, thanks for coming, and thank you especially for the wealth of questions that you chose when Gabrielle sent out the questionnaire. It really helped the three of us come together and figure out, what are the things that we need to focus on. It totally changed some of the things that we were going to talk about, which is a good thing. So my focus, based on your responses, will be talking very briefly about documentation, since that seems to be a concern and should be a concern. Also talk about some of the resources that could be utilized, particularly for the anxiety and stress that we're all seeing on campus. And then finally, who to contact, in addition to the wealth of information you just heard from Joan. So documented students. You're not dreaming, you really are getting more accommodation letters, whether you're getting them through our office and Clockwork or whether you're getting them through ODS. There are more students on campus that are presenting documentation. We, in our office, just to give you a feel for it, this particular academic year, we increased by 30%. Yeah, that's how we felt. 30%, which equates to 494 students. Again, this does not count ODS. This is a huge climb for us. We had leveled off over the past few years. We've sat down and tried to figure out what's happening, because it's not much different this year from last year. And I think in some cases our data management system Clockwork has something to do with it, because it is easier for the students to upload the documentation. It's a faster process. And hopefully, it's an efficient process. We feel that it's great as far as keeping us in compliance and confidentiality. But 494 students is a big jump. The focus today is the 38% of that 494 who are presenting with a mental health condition. And that's astonishing. Now, not all of that 38% are solely mental health issues. Some of them might be a student that has a learning disability, but also has a generalized anxiety disorder. So there can be some comorbidity. In LSS, what is very different than some of the issues that Joan deals with in the counseling center is most of the students with a mental health disorder that we're dealing with are students that have a history and arrive on campus with documentation. But that doesn't mean there isn't an occasional student that comes forward with a new diagnosis, but the majority of the students will come in with that documentation. So what that means is they have a doctor at home, they have a therapist at home. This could go back to their high school years, middle school, and in some cases elementary school. So there's a long history there. The issues that we deal with sometimes are the students that, had these issues in high school and, even were homeschooled because they struggled so much, and then they come across the country and go to Villanova. So, what is the likelihood that this is going to be a smooth transition? So, we're particularly concerned about the freshmen that come in with these types of diagnoses. So, in most cases, they still think that they're going to be able to connect with their therapist from home. And some will say, oh, well, we're going to Skype, or I can call them at any time. And all of that sounds wonderful, but, there's so many things going on 24/7 around here that can be problematic. So we do everything we can to encourage the student to go over to the counseling center and to locate a therapist nearby that can then confer with their therapist from home, because that first year can be so critical. So the students, that 38% of students, many of them need no accommodation whatsoever. And what we often will do, and this is something that you can see on the accommodation letter, is that we'll mention something like, this is an alert more or less for in case a student has a flare-up. And if they have a flare-up, it may impact their attendance, which results in possibly extending the attendance guidelines or giving them reasonable extensions on assignments. Just using the word reasonable in those signs can be problematic. But we use that accommodation and refer to it as for episodic conditions, and you have a handout about those. And I won't go into great detail about that, but we use that also for students that we work with that have chronic physical health conditions. So for a student that has Crohn's disease, something along that line. So what that means is either one of those students could be in your class regularly and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden you get an email or they don't show up for a while, and it's because they've had a flare-up. So to really make this accommodation work, one of our learning specialists, Emily Harris, worked on finding out from some other institutions how they were handling this, because it's a very common problem. It's not unique to Villanova, because of the need for these extensions and how do we monitor it. So we tried to come up with a process, and that's what that is on that sheet. It all comes down to communication. And I know we have in the accommodation that the student will communicate with you as soon as possible. And sometimes that might be same day, but if they're having a true attack, it could be a few days. It could be longer. And this is where the communication is key. When you've received that letter from us and this student is missing, please let us know. And we'll assist in trying to locate, what's going on. Because we're not notified. The notification if a student is missing is going to go to their dean's office. And occasionally we'll be notified, but most of the time we're not. So the episodic conditions, there are questions about it, and Emily's going to be here at the end of the day for that resource fair at a table that we're going to have from Learning Support if you have any specific questions about it. The real key here is that students are still required to meet the requirements for your course. You don't modify the standards of your course. And that's absolute, not just for these 38%, for any student that has accommodations. The accommodations are just what they say. They're accommodations, but the student got in the same way as everyone else, and they're expected to perform that way. Sometimes as freshmen, they don't fully understand that, because if they had accommodations in high school, they were guaranteed success. But here, in higher ed, it's strictly guaranteeing access. So there's a big difference. They have the same ability to fail as any other student. So, for better or worse, that's the key. So two things that I think in these kinds of situations could be a real help to all of us is in developing your syllabus. Make every effort you can to be as detailed as possible. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is, it certainly helps the student. Now, I know there's students that never look at the syllabus, or it seems like they never look at the syllabus. But it really does help for, a student that we're working with to really be able to make a plan with them. And they, so that if they do have an episode, we can see where the deadlines are coming and what can be done about it. The other piece of having a detailed syllabus is it really helps you if it comes down to, what are the essential requirements of your course? The student has missed 8 classes, and my policy is, after 4 classes, you drop a grade. So we need to, if you have in your syllabus why it is the absolute essential requirement of that course that a student be there every day, that makes it easier if it comes to that. Okay, now, all of you will feel that it is an essential requirement for the student to be there in your class. But when it comes down to the actual essential ingredients of a course, the requirements to be in a lab class are probably a little bit stronger than the requirements to be in a class that's straight lecture. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that could really be helpful in the syllabus. The other piece that would be incredibly helpful is keeping track of attendance. Now, I'm not saying, you're going to go around the class and take, specific attendance every day. But the number of students that we find out about because in one class, the professor notified their assistant dean's office that, I haven't seen this student in 3 weeks. I thought they dropped the class. What will the assistant dean office do is they will send out a notice to all of the other professors to get a feel for where they are. And we can connect at that point. We meaning, the Villanova community, not we at LSS. We can then, respond. And in some cases see that a student is really in pain and in struggle and they need attention. And unfortunately sometimes this happens at the very end of the semester, and it involves, a quick medical leave. But those kinds of things can be incredibly helpful to everybody. So certainly, speak up, let it be known. Don't think you're bothering anybody, because it's a way for us to follow up on students. So secondly, anxiety. It's everywhere. It is not limited to Villanova, that's for sure. All we have to do is watch TV. So in the classroom, we're usually thinking about, test anxiety, preparing, presentations, stress associated with grades, parental pressure, trying to fit in. All of those things are creating anxiety and stress. So where do you send a student when that kind of thing is going on? Certainly the counseling center, and Joan put a list together that all of you have about some of the questions that students might have about the counseling center, which is really helpful. But there are other options too that you can try to connect the student. There's a sheet that we included for you that actually was put together by Kathy Burns in Student Life. And she gave me permission to share that with you today. There's a slew of groups on that list that many of them will sponsor programs for students, give them opportunities to connect, have some peer educators in some cases. If you look at that list and you're not familiar with it, Google it on the Villanova site and get a feel for some of the programs that they have. Because the student that is too intimidated to go to the counseling center, maybe initially there's something that you could connect them with. And so I think, even we don't associate that with student life, but all of those are under the student life umbrella, and it could really be helpful. Yes, that's helpful. The mental health and well-being at Villanova is what it's called. Thank you, Pat. So you have those resources, plus you have the academic support office resources, you know, the different advising offices that can be so helpful. The, you know, sending students to tutoring sometimes can be helpful in terms of alleviating some of their anxiety. So the learning center. The other is the care team. And the care team is just another resource to try to make sure that a student doesn't fall through the cracks. The care team meets on a weekly basis. They typically aren't the individuals that are going to be working with the student, but whenever a student is presented, it's amazing how quickly a connection can be made, because you have somebody there from Res Life, you have Joan there from the counseling center, you have the dean of students on there, and you have public safety, Dave Tedeschi is there. So it's very easy to distinguish, you know, has this student ever come in front of us before? And then if someone is referred, then someone on that committee will take responsibility for following up to see that the student is making the necessary connections. It came up a lot in the questions about, you know, how do we refer to the care committee? And the good news is, starting in the fall, each of the college's assistant deans will be members of the care committee. So it should make it so much easier, so that when you make that reference because a student hasn't been showing in classes for a couple weeks, it's the assistant dean's office that's going to get that. And so we're hoping that that's going to help alleviate some of that. The communication, even with that, is really key, and the idea of finding out, you know, what are the resources that a student can use. So if a student is referred to the care committee and we find out that they're utilizing, you know, they're working with a counselor in CASA, they're working with Krista in athletics, they're working with somebody in LSS, then, you know, then we know that, you know, they're getting some of the support that they need, and it'll be easier for different follow-up. In LSS, one of the things that we do with, and this is, Matt referred to this, that now that we can provide some support for any student, not accommodations, but academic support, is our coaching. We call it academic coaching, because we want the students to know that we are not counselors. You know, we have the counseling center for that. We're not academic advisors. Okay, so we refer to ourselves as coaches. Don't ask us to do any sport coaching. We wouldn't be able to do that. Anyway, in coaching, a student can come in once, they can come in on a weekly basis, they can come in for 4 years. We've had some that have gone on to grad school and they still come in. But they work with an individual learning specialist, and they would remain with that individual for as long as they want. So the majority of the students that come in will initially come in on a weekly basis. It's a guaranteed 30-minute appointment. And the learning specialist and the student will work together on whatever it is that student needs. So it's typically going to start out with time management and organization, and then it might get into study plans and that sort of thing. None of it is content related, other than, you know, organizing them, you know, in terms of checking on their note taking, seeing if how they're studying for exams. It has been incredibly successful for us in terms of being able to respond to students and allowing a more inclusive environment. So it helps us remove that stigma of the disability resource room that students have, because, you know, anybody coming up to LSS, you know, they could be coming next door to CASA, you know, or to the writing center or the math center or one of the research librarians. You know, it's not known, you know, what the issue is. So it does provide that, but we had over 2,000 sessions this year. So, you know, we have 3.5 people supposedly doing that. Lynn Burke is our half, but, you know, she's good as gold and stays forever, so that's been wonderful. So if anxiety is the focus, you know, then what we're going to do is try and find out, is that anxiety limited to test anxiety, to one area of their life? Because then we're going to focus on the planning and such. But if it turns out that their anxiety is hitting other facets of their life, you know, we could be talking about a much more significant issue, and in that case, we're going to refer them to the counseling center. Okay? Occasionally, we're gonna get referrals from the counseling center for the same reason, where a student shows up with them and the counselor meets with them and realizes that, you know, they really just need more time management and organization, and they'll send them our way. So you are seeing the anxiety. I think recognizing that the students do have this is certainly an issue, but you know, unfortunately, we're dealing with a population of students that, you know, haven't gained an appreciation for the idea that a little anxiety can be good. You know, they seem to have a problem with that. You know, everything has to go smoothly, you know, and we can come up with all kinds of theories as to why that's happening, but it does present an issue. Joan really touched on this, and I'm going to be very brief about this, and that's you know, that all sounds well and good, but what do you do in an emergency situation? Who in here has ever witnessed a panic attack? Yeah, it is scary, and it runs the gamut. It's like, you know, any individual. It could be, you know, a student, you know, chronically crying. It could be shaking. It could be, you know, hugging themselves, you know, and just, you know, rocking, or it could be passing out. And, you know, and individual professors have all dealt with this, and some have contacted us afterwards and sent the student over. In an emergency situation, you're not gonna say, I think you should go to the counseling center. You know, you're gonna take Joan's advice, and in that situation, you need public safety, okay? And so if you're in class and this happens, and a student might come up to you and they're shaking, or you see that they're really shaking, it would be going up, you know, are you okay? You know, do you need to leave class? Let them leave class, and then you might want to call public safety, okay? This has happened with a couple of professors. So if you feel more comfortable following the student, then ask a student in your class to call public safety. But public safety has, you know, we've had to call them when we're proctoring final exams. And, you know, you know, and when we get into any of those tense periods, we're going to have a tendency to see it a little bit more. It could also happen in your office, when office hours, you know, where a student really can't control themselves, and that may be necessary. But the other thing with office hours, if you have a student that you're really concerned about and you want them to go to the counseling center, suggest calling right then. Say, you know, would it be okay if I call them right now and see if we can get an appointment? We do that often, and Joan's people are so well trained, and you know, they're able to tell whether it's a same day situation, and they take care of it, and they make room for a student. Occasionally, you know, some of us have had to walk students down, which is wonderful if you're capable of doing it. But you know, just making that initial connection can really be helpful. And even making a connection with us or with their academic advisor or whatever. Do it while the student's right there. Have them, you know, hand them the phone to schedule an appointment, because then you're gonna feel better about it, and it'll certainly be better for the student. So my final keys, attendance is important. So please let us know if a student is missing. Let us, meaning your assistant dean's office, know that a student is missing. And if you think a student is struggling, certainly acknowledge it the way Joan mentioned, and you know, and say, what have you done in the past that's been helpful? You know, and if they're freshmen, you know, what kind of support did you have in high school? And oftentimes you're going to find out then that they had a lot of support, and you can say, well, we have that here, you know, and then you can pull out your little handouts that you have, and you can go through the list and get them. So making that connection can really be valuable. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. And that's how I start my class. We say hello to everyone, and we have that expectation that people will greet us back. When they don't, we kind of begin to look at what's going on with you. And that's the piece of looking at mood and what's happening in the classroom. I want to start with attendance, since you ended with attendance. In nursing, in the upper level courses, many of them, attendance is not mandatory, yet we take roll. So we take attendance. We hand out an attendance sheet and people sign in. And then in my class, if they don't sign in, I send an email. Oh, I noticed you didn't sign in. Are you okay? So that's the first outreach. And what I get back is, thank you for checking on. Every once in a while I get that, whose business is it of yours? Now, those aren't the words that come back, but the tone of the email says, what do you mean? I thought that I didn't have to come to class if I don't want to, or whatever. So part of that is reaching out and letting them know that we notice. And we do care about whether they're there or not, and can we help you with whatever it is that has prevented you from coming in. We share our students, and that's the thing that I guess we feel appreciative about. You're never alone. And I just like a show of hands of anyone in this class who has shared a nursing student with us. Look around, everyone. So we call each other, we email each other. Some of us have people on speed dial, and we know, and we share the student in terms of, this is a student who maybe we're trying to get to the counseling center and mom says they can't go. This is a student who is having difficulty getting along with other people, but they need to keep to themselves. So they'll come in and see me, they'll come in and they'll see someone from Learning Support, they'll go to see someone from CASA, so they'll have 5 or 6 different people that they see, and all of us are going towards the same thing, how to connect the student in more to their courses as well as to their classmates. So one of the things that I would just say as a faculty member, we are what we call academic advisors, but we know that it's more than just academics. Particularly when the freshmen first come to us, and where the connection between where the parents are, think about being a surrogate, and limit setting, and that unconditional regard. So we're able to do that and give that to the student. At the same time, when we're setting those limits, what we're really saying is, I heard you didn't make it to class today. And the student will say, how'd you hear that? And that's because walking down the hall, Dr. Weingarten said so-and-so didn't come today. And that we're able to communicate with each other that we care about the student and that we want to see them be successful. I like what you said about access to success that you're guaranteeing. And so how can we help the student then to get the success part together? And that's being able to use their resources. When students come to me, because I'm a psych professor, and they often will come after class and say, I have a friend. And sometimes it is a friend, and other times it might be themselves. And usually it's second semester junior year, and many students then begin to reveal some of their difficulties that they have. And they'll reveal it sometimes to their clinical faculty because they keep journals, and most often to the theory professors. But they might come to their advisor, and then their advisor's not sure, what do I do? So my door is always open. That's what we always say. How do we get the student the help that they need? And the biggest thing that we do is we encourage them to reach out to get someone for themselves. Because people often will say, I have my mom, I have my friends, I have, all these other support people. And what we talk about is, do you have someone who's not in charge of your grade or whose feelings you're not afraid to hurt? And that's how sometimes we get them to the counseling center. Another way that we get them there is, just as Nancy and Joan said, we call with them in the office. Let's call together. And you pick up the phone before they can say no. And then you get a live person on the phone who's kind and says, yes, I'll see the student. Can they come over right now? And you walk them over if you have the time to do it. Many a path, down the path from the nursing building to the counseling center, do we go with a faculty member walking the student and doing a handoff. which we do in nursing with our patients, but we do a handoff in terms of what's happening with the student, what the student's concerned about, what it is that we're hoping that they can get by going to the counseling center. We do have barriers. We have students who say, my parents don't want me to have a diagnosis. The thing is, there's no diagnosis anywhere around. Joan?
Right, that's true.
You don't keep.
We don't do diagnoses.
And you don't have labels. They don't keep them. Because we look at what the issue is and what it is that we're trying to take care of. So sometimes we have to tell the student that, and every once in a while they go in spite of what mom said. So as an advisor, sometimes we have to help them know what to say to their parents to say, I did get some help, and what that help was like. What I wrote down here were a couple of the things that, from the questions we had, what's in a name? And there was a concern about when we say mental health, are we, instead of mental illness, are we putting the stigma on the mental illness, and why mental health? Part of that is we don't have labels, and we all are going towards having positive mental health. And that's where our expectations are. And so you'll hear, I'm a professor of psychiatric mental health nurse, and we have people who come with mental health concerns. And we really want to help people to get the resources and to get the help they need. The second term that I wrote down from what people were asking about was support. And what does support look like? For the most part, it looks like what the person who needs it feels is helpful to them. And sometimes we, in our own mind, know just what you should do. And we try to have to bracket that. Anybody here cohabitating with an adolescent? And what did Joan say? You know, what do we say to our children? And then what do we say to our students? People ask the question, is it helpful to talk about your own issues with a student to really help them understand that you know what they're talking about? In psych nursing, we teach the students, and people ask me what I do, and I say I teach nursing, and they say, what kind of nursing? I teach students how to listen, is what I answer. And how to listen in a special way, how to listen with your ears, your eyes, and your heart. So, when a student listens with their heart, they can hear that the person is going through something, and they don't need to talk about their own issues to have the person know, I hear you. In the way that you listen and the way you respond. Wow, that looks like it's a lot. Sounds stressful. A lot of things you're going through. So acknowledging what you're hearing them say is, in fact, not only active listening, but it's empathetic listening. So we teach our students that when they're talking to their patient, once they say I, it's no longer patient-centered. Once they begin to tell their story, it's no longer about the patient. So we then translate that into how, when we talk to our students, once we say, I know what you mean because we're again taking it away from the student. People like to have things taken away from them, such as a label of, I'm not well. So they're going to listen to your problems, and they're going to help you with your problems, Professor. And they're going to worry about you and be concerned that you have too much on your plate for them to then talk to you. So we have to really be careful about that. And I would just say that we have the advantage in psych of always having that's a piece of the work that we do. But in terms of, as a parent, as a faculty member, we do want to share our stories so that we could spare the person what we went through. Yet, we also know that when we were told those stories, we felt like, and let me go through it so that I could learn from that experience. So we have to just be careful, I would say, in terms of, do you talk about yourself? You don't have to in order to let them know that you do hear what they're saying, you know they're going through something. The second piece of that is I always encourage the student to get someone for themselves. Somebody who has no control over their grade. I'm sitting there, I'm the course leader. In the end, they're gonna get a grade. And someone who has no emotional connection to them helping this person feel better. I can't tell my mom that because it'll make her sad. You know, students think about those kind of things. So when you do go to counseling and to the counseling center, here's somebody who's just listening to you, for you, and about you. And that's what students sometimes come back and say, that's what worked about it. So I'd like to encourage people to think about that. I'm going to end up so that we could have time for any questions. Is that where we're going, Matt?
Yeah, we have some time for questions, so thank you, Pat, and thank you to